welcome back. Today, we're jumping into one of the most intense confrontations in the entire New Testament. We're going to do a verse-by-verse breakdown of Matthew chapter 23, where Jesus just unleashes this powerful critique against the religious leaders of his day, and he hammers them for one devastating flaw: hypocrisy.
You hear this phrase over and over again. It's the start of 7 sharp rebukes, these woes, aimed right at the religious elite. And the heart of it all, the word he keeps coming back to, is that single powerful word, hypocrites.
Okay, so let's dive right into the first of these woes, which kicks off in verse 23. This is where Jesus goes right after this staggering imbalance in their priorities. He shows how their hypocrisy made them obsess over the tiny stuff while completely ignoring what actually mattered. So he starts by acknowledging just how meticulous they were with their religious rules. I mean, they were so incredibly detailed that they were calculating a 10% offering, a tithe, on even the smallest, most insignificant herbs from their gardens. And you gotta understand, these weren't some rare exotic spices. We're talking about mint, dill, and cumin, stuff people had in their little kitchen gardens. The point Jesus is making is that these leaders were absolutely obsessed with the outward show of being religious. They'd count out every last leaf to give their 10%, not because the law demanded it for such small things, but to show everyone else how devout they were.
Now here's what's so fascinating. Jesus doesn't tell them to stop tithing these herbs. He actually says, these you ought to have done. See, the problem wasn't the act itself. The real issue is that they were so busy performing this tiny little act that they completely ignored the entire point of the law, what he calls the weightier matters of justice, mercy, and faith.
And then, in verse 24, he just hits them with this brilliant, almost comical metaphor. They strain at a gnat and swallow a camel. So, a gnat was considered an unclean insect, and they'd carefully filter their wine to make sure they didn't accidentally swallow one. But a camel? That was one of the largest unclean animals they knew. The picture is just absurd. Carefully picking a tiny bug out of your drink, only to gulp down a whole camel. It perfectly captures how their obsession with microscopic rules made them blind to massive moral corruption. Okay, so from there, we move into verse 25, and you can feel the critique getting even more personal. It's shifting from what they do to who they are, from their hypocritical actions to their corrupt inner character.
Here, Jesus grabs this really simple, everyday image, a cup. He says, look, you guys are obsessed with making the outside of the cup look spotless, but the inside, the part that actually touches what you're drinking, is disgusting. It's filled with the results of your greed and self-indulgence.
And it's so important to get this. This had nothing to do with hygiene or being physically clean. For the Pharisees, ritual washing was a huge part of their public identity. They came up with these incredibly complex traditions, rules you couldn't even find in Scripture, all about how to wash their hands and dishes. It was all a performance, right? All designed to keep up this outward appearance of holiness for everyone to see. And that brings us to his central command here in verse 26. Clean the inside first. His point is totally radical. He's saying true purity isn't some external ritual you perform. It's a moral condition. It's about your heart. If you fix the greed and the corruption on the inside, the outside will naturally become clean too. So if you thought the dirty cup was a powerful image, just wait. In verse 27, he completely escalates the metaphor to something even more graphic: a whitewashed tomb. Back then, tombs were painted bright white so people wouldn't accidentally touch one and become ritually unclean, which would keep them out of the temple. So from a distance, they looked pure, pristine, and safe. But what's really inside a tomb? Well, it's death, it's decay, it's corruption. And that's his point. He's saying that just like those beautiful tombs, the leaders look righteous on the outside, but inside, their spiritual life is just full of moral decay and death.
All right, now we get to the climax of this whole argument, and it is absolutely devastating. Starting in verse 29, Jesus connects their hypocrisy directly to the darkest chapters of their own national history.
So he points to this thing they do. They make a big public show of building these beautiful, ornate memorials for the prophets, the very prophets their own ancestors murdered. They decorate their tombs and say out loud, if we had lived back then, we would never have done that. We would have been on the prophet's side. I mean, that sounds pretty good, right? They're honoring God's messengers who were killed. What could possibly be wrong with that? Well, this is where Jesus exposes this just terrible and profound irony.
This is just brilliant. He takes their own words and turns them right back on them, like a confession. In verse 31, he says that by calling the murderers our fathers, they are testifying against themselves. They're admitting they're the children of the prophet killers. But he's saying it's not just about bloodline, it's about their spirit. By plotting to kill him, they are proving they are exactly like the very ancestors they claim to condemn.
And this all builds to verse 33, which is without a doubt the single harshest condemnation in the whole chapter. He calls them serpents, a generation of vipers, which is a direct echo of the deceiver in the Garden of Eden. It is the ultimate insult. And then he asks this terrifying rhetorical question. With a character so corrupt, how can you escape the damnation of hell? He's declaring that their path of hypocrisy leads to only one place: judgment.
So this whole passage really leaves us with a pretty heavy question, and it's not just for them back then, it's for us right now. What happens when our external rituals, our public reputation, our symbols of faith become more important than actual justice, mercy, and integrity? What have we really become?